Sir Speaker, with your permission, I seek your permission to read your bio, sir.
Yeah, you have my permission.
Thank you so much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, among us, we have today Mohan V. Katarki, sir. He is a senior advocate in the Supreme Court of India. At present, he is a member of the Advisory Board, Karnataka State Law University, Review, and the Board of Management and Planning, Karnataka State Law University. Sir has developed a specialized practice in interstate water law concerning sharing or allocation of water between the states in the interstate river and river valley. Sir has also presented papers at various national and international conferences and seminars, including Regional Conference on Water Resources at Teslik, Bosnia 2001, International Water Law Conference at Colorado Law School, Boulder, USA, Interstate and International Water Dispute Seminar conducted by WB International University of Judicial Sciences, Kolkata, and many others. We are indeed gracious for your presence here today, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you for a short introduction, which I enjoyed. At the outset, I welcome all the students to this induction program. I compliment the students and the teaching staff on Teachers' Day, which is an important day in the education system.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The topic chosen for today is a bit abstract topic. My effort is to make it more interesting so that students of law will benefit from the discussion on basic juristic concepts. In the topic, 3 juristic concepts have been spelled out: law, liberty, and rule of law. These 3 may appear independent, but they are closely interrelated. The legal system of any country or any school, whether it is Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American, continental, or Eastern legal system, is in the end analyzed on the basis of lawmaking process, protection of liberty, and the application of rule of law as a general principle. Therefore, the knowledge of this topic, which is, as I said, underpinning of any legal system, is very vital for the law students. Law course is not a training. It is a rigorous academic exercise. Law can be read or can be understood by a common man also. But lawyers read law as a student of law with underpinnings of juristic concepts. The intellectual side of the law is what you are ultimately going to study in the law school. Therefore, any law school which gives importance to the jurisprudence and the juristic concept is really the law school which is moving in the right direction. Therefore, I compliment your law school, the ULC, for choosing this topic. What is law? What is liberty? And what is rule of law? The law ought to have its source in sovereign. The law should integrate itself with pre-existing liberty vested in the individuals. And lastly, the relationship between the law and liberty should be built on the principles of rule of law. Therefore, it is three concepts which are integrated here. What's law? Law is quintessentially a command. However, all commands are not laws. Commands are issued by X to Y. They are issued in the family. They are issued in the social group. Umpire issues a command to the players in football or cricket. These are not the laws. The law, to qualify some command as a law, it must have its source in the sovereign or the officers appointed by the sovereign. So it is a command issued by the sovereign to its subjects, namely the citizenry residing within its territorial jurisdiction, which is law. Law commands you to do something or to refrain you from doing something. In the ultimate analysis, it gets reduced to do's and don'ts. Whenever you come across study of any law, as a student, you will come across so many acts passed by the parliament. In fact, there are 4,000 acts passed by the parliament in India. Some of them were passed by the British Parliament or the legislature which existed before the coming into force of the Constitution, which have been continued as existing laws. All these laws in the end have to be analyzed by looking to what is the command the law has issued to the individuals. The subject of law is individual or group of individuals, like corporates, company, or cooperatives, or a society. The subject of law cannot be other than an individual or a living individual. Even where the law requires protection of environment, you have to think immediately what are the duties imposed upon the individuals or the group of individuals or the state as an entity to protect that environment. When the law says be nice to animals, it imposes an obligation on the animals. The Animal Act enacted by the Parliament is not a law addressed to the animals. It is addressed to the individuals because the legal system is founded on the principle of regulating the conduct of individuals. Therefore, the subject of law is individuals. Now, if subject of law is individual and the law is what is enacted by the sovereign, why should there be more discussion on the subject? Whatever the sovereign has enacted, we'll read it and enforce it. Could that be a law? Certainly not. Because law has to act upon individuals who have otherwise a freedom of action. That is called liberty. The difference between sovereign and the chess player very well explained by some jurist, which I do not remember now. Long back I had read it. Chess player plays chess on a chessboard where there are 64 squares with 16 pieces. The player, by his wisdom, takes out each piece and gives fairy likes to defeat his opponent. When a sovereign seeks to regulate or seeks to play with the individuals or citizens in his territory, do not have that freedom to pick up individuals and place them where he likes. He cannot direct them as he pleases. Why? What is the difference? The difference is the individuals whom the sovereign, by his command, by his law, seeks to regulate have independent action. They are unlike pieces of chessboard. They can move on their own. That is liberty. Liberty of action exists in each individual. Individual is not a stone. He is not a dead wood. He is or she is a person who has his own mind, his own moment of action. Therefore, when the law decides to regulate or control an individual, it has to be consistent with the liberty of action already vested in the individual. It can only interfere into the liberty action of an individual to the extent interference is justified, not otherwise. This is where the difficulty arises. If a sovereign goes ahead with the law as he likes, without caring for the wishes of the people, that is the liberty of individuals, then he will be isolating himself from the people. And his rule or his law is bound to receive opposition in the public. Such a law will not find acceptance. Therefore, the study of law involves not only understanding what the law is, but also to understand what is the pre-existing liberty of the citizen which the law has sought to regulate. In course of your study, you will study the law of property. You will study the law of contract. You will study the law of torts. Fine. But just do not study them as commands of the sovereign or the commands issued by the legislature, which has the power to make laws. When you study the Contract Act, please remember that law of contract is not purely a construct of the law itself. Behind the law of contract, there is an independent of action. Liberty of contract is the right or liberty of a citizen. Two individuals have liberty of contract. They can contract to sell their property. They can contract to perform some action for payment, whatever the like. The law comes into picture when the lawmaker thinks that the liberty of contract which individuals have requires to be regulated in public interest. So when the law is made by the legislature to regulate the liberty of contract, it has a purpose. Therefore, a student of law when he studies the law of contract, he looks into the subject from the point of to what extent the law has interfered and regulated liberty of contract which otherwise exist in the individuals. It is a curtailment of liberty of contract. Professor Avery Jennings put it in a very broad form. He said every law is an invasion of liberty. It is true. Many have raised the question, if every law is an invasion of liberty, does it mean law is antithetical to the liberty? Is it antithesis of liberty? It's not so. No doubt, every law is an attempt to regulate the liberty of a citizen which pre-exists. But the law interferes, regulates in public interest to achieve the larger good. That is how the law becomes relevant. And the law also seeks to promote the liberty of an individual by trade-off. When it regulates your liberty, it restricts somebody's liberty to interfere into your right. When the law regulates your liberty to own the property, it also at the same time imposes an obligation on others not to interfere into your property. So regulation is in public interest as well as to promote the interest of the holder of liberty or the person who possesses the liberty to own a property. Law is, in that sense, is not antithetical to the liberty, but it promotes liberty. But this is how the relationship exists. The liberty of action vested in the individual broadly has three components. Liberty of action with regard to the mind, that I have liberty to think what I like to think. Liberty to speak, which is freedom of speech, the most fundamental liberty, as you have been these days hearing a lot about freedom of speech and its relationship with dignity of the judiciary, where line to be drawn. I need not go into that, but that is the issue. The third one is liberty of movement, which is also called a personal liberty. So the entire legal system attempts to regulate these three liberties. Whenever you come across any law, please try to go beyond the law as written in the textbook or as written in the barracks and ask a question, which is the pre-existing liberty which the law has been attempting to regulate. In what manner it regulates is a separate question. It may modify, it may completely extinguish, or it may take over or abolish the right and create a statutory right like Patents Act. So it can do in a various form, but you have to know which is that liberty or freedom which the law has attempted to regulate. With regard to the liberty, there's a long history. It did not find its recognition that easily as we talk. The ancient society, the medieval society were autocratic. Often philosophers spoke about liberty, but it was mainly a symbolic. There nothing as such a liberty existed. Everything was in the hands of the ruler, king or a queen. And his command, his law is a law. Whether it promotes liberty or whether it justifies limitation on the liberty was no concern of the ruler, except some of the things he considers himself in the interest of his conscience permits or something dictates him to limit his power. He never thought he owes any obligation to the people to limit his powers. From there we came the concept of liberty in 12th century. The famous document you must have heard, Magna Carta, recognized the liberty in a form not as we understand in the modern world, but it is considered to be the first document which really recognized the liberty of individuals. Then comes, after that, in 1628, the English Parliament passed the Petition of Right, which set out specific liberties of English subjects. The Petition of Right in 1628 is a very important step where the sovereign, speaking through the Parliament, recognized certain rights of the individuals. Then in 1679, the English Parliament passed the Habeas Corpus Act, which gave a right to the individual to petition the King's Court seeking an answer on the detention of a person. So this important act is considered to be a great step in the movement for securing liberty of a citizen. Then comes Bill of Rights, granted freedom of speech in Parliament. Even in Parliament, to begin with, there is no freedom of speech. It was a representative body for the representatives to come and sit and listen to the speeches of the kings or his ministers and go home. The first time in 1689, freedom of speech of parliamentarians was recognized. Then in 1772, in a case Somerset versus Stewart, the English court came out with a path-breaking decision. It said there is no common law to own a slave. When right of ownership was not given to own another person, the principle behind was that each individual has a liberty. Therefore, you cannot be owning another person. It's a very fundamental principle which English court recognized way back in 1772 in Somerset versus Stewart. Then in 1859, John Stuart Mill wrote a famous book on liberty and very forcefully argued for toleration and individuality. He said, I quote, "If any opinion is compelled to silence, that opinion may, for ought to we can certainly know, be true. To deny this is to assume our own infallibility. To assume our own infallibility. Therefore, the liberty which we enjoy today, which the modern society enjoys, has a long drawn history. In 1958, a new juridical concept was developed by jurist Berlin, that liberty is not only negative liberty, it is a positive liberty also. Now, the effect of this negative liberty and positive liberty, you will soon study it when you study Article 21 of the Constitution. It's not only the liberty, that is negative liberty which is guaranteed, but a positive liberty, the positive right is guaranteed, which puts an obligation on the state to provide you certain things, or you have a claim or a demand over the state, like right to food, right to health, right to basic necessities. So negative right or negative liberty was converted into positive liberty. This is how the history of law and liberty we come across. Right. Sovereign has the power to make a law. We want him to take into account the pre-existing liberties of the individuals, and also studied what this liberty is. This liberty is in three parts: liberty of mind, that is right to think; liberty of movement; and liberty to own property. Right? Fine. But is it a sufficient guarantee? In what manner, how the parliament conducts itself, or how the lawmaker or a sovereign conducts itself in dealing with the liberty became the question. A blanket power to the sovereign to deal with the liberties, to deal with the freedom, was found not acceptable to the people. People sought to place certain restrictions on the sovereign itself. There has to be law against the sovereign itself. The law is not only against the individuals, but there must be some law how sovereign conducts himself. That is what is called rule of law. It regulates the relationship between sovereign and the individual, whose liberty sovereign has a right to curtail in larger public interest, or to promote the interest of the individual itself. But he must deal with the liberties in a refined and a civilized manner. And this is the catchy phrase, that is rule of law. What does this rule of law imply? What are these principles which govern the sovereign? First is, there should be transparency. The sovereign who makes the law cannot sit in a chamber with some chosen representatives or ministers and make the law. He must make it in a transparent manner by sitting in People's Council, which we call Parliament, where all have the freedom of speech to give their opinion, to give their ideas. And after that, sovereign enacts the law. So transparency is the most important aspect. Secondly, it's not just sufficient that the representatives sit in the parliament and make the law. The law has to be published. It should be made known to the public. It should be told to the public. So publication of the laws in the Gazette became important. The present generation is not much aware about the Gazette because the law which you want to read, you get on the internet, on websites. But the generation which studied law, that is my generation, or even previous to that, the only source of information of what is the law was Gazette. The lawyer should rush to the government press asking for the Gazette and buy it and keep it in a proper safe custody so that whenever you want, you can read it. Of course, there are some private publications, AIR publications, etc., which printed the laws, but that would take a time before those private agencies go for printing. It was actually the Gazette which was the source, which was the immediate source of knowledge of law. So first is transparency. Second principle is publication to the people. The third principle is important. That is substantive principle. Why I'm saying is substantive. The legal scholars in their deliberation on rule of law have divided it into two branches. One is formal school of rule of law. Second is substantive aspect. The formal school of rule of law is only concerned with manner of making the law. Has it been done in transparent manner? Has it been communicated to people? There ends the matter. The formal school on rule of law does not go beyond procedural protection required in making law. But the substantive school of rule of law goes beyond and looks into the justness of the law. It wants to check, test, and verify whether the law made by the legislature is just or unjust. Is it reasonable or unreasonable? If it is not reasonable, then it's not a law in proper sense. Then the substantive school of rule of law recognizes the power of judiciary and it contemplates an independent adjudicatory body to check the actions of the sovereign, both at the lawmaking level and as well as at the level of executive, which implements the law. At the level of lawmaking, the judiciary, under the school of substantive rule of law, is recognized with power to strike down a law if it is unjust. Now, what extent the judiciary can strike down is a different concept. There are various sub-principles in this. Till the other day, we all thought the judicial power to check the reasonableness of law in India is only again a procedural aspect. It cannot go into the question whether the law is just or unjust. It cannot say whether it is arbitrary or whether it is not arbitrary. But after the triple talaq judgment and a couple of judgments, the Supreme Court of India has recognized indeed the right of the judiciary, the power of judiciary to look into the justness of the law, whether it is arbitrary or not. If it is arbitrary, the court will strike down the law. This is the substance. Under the school of substantive rule of law, one of the important principle is equality or no discrimination. So the entire common law relating to the property of persons, which we adopted in India with modification, which we adopted in India with modification, is tested inherently on the principle of equality. Although the English courts do not have the power to strike down the law on a ground that something is discriminatory or does not meet the test of equality, but while declaring the common law, the English courts always bore in mind the principle of equality, and Indian courts too, when they interpreted the common law for application in India, they too similarly went by the principle of equity, and one of the principles of equity is equality. So these are the principles of rule of law based upon which the law is tested. So we have come from what the law, command of the sovereign, the liberty, and the relationship between law and liberty regulated by the concept of rule of law, which puts certain obligations on the lawmaker when it deals with liberties of citizens. Now, this is all theoretical. This is all theoretical. What happens when a country has a written constitution? Where there is a written constitution, the principle is the rule of law is crystallized into the constitution itself. The constitution is the rule of law. You cannot go beyond that, except the window provided by the constitution itself. The Constitution of India embodies rule of law. It is constructed on the principle of rule of law. Where do you find this? You'll find all over your parliament or the state legislature to make the laws. These legislative bodies are composed of elected representatives who are elected by the people. Therefore, test of transparency is met. Then we have freedom of speech in the parliament. The members of parliament can participate in the debate. They have even right to introduce private members' bill. They have right to question. Of course, next parliamentary session in India is not going to have the question hour for the reasons which you need not bother. You have been reading in the newspaper whether such an act of suspension of question hour is justified or not. In my view, not justified, but that is separate. But the basic principle is people have a right to question the government, and that is the most important right, which is a part of the test of transparency. Then we have publication. In fact, publication has taken to a next stage now. It's not only a gazette publication. You get laws immediately on the internet. You can have access to them as fast as possible. Then we have part 3 of the Constitution, where the rights of individuals are guaranteed. What's this rights of individuals in part 3? What does it mean? It means there are restrictions on the powers of the parliament or the state legislature or the executive. While acting, they shall not trample into these defined rights. These fundamental rights spelled out in part 3 constitute a restriction on the powers of the government. So the substantive test is also met. Sorry, there has been an interruption. Some calls are coming. So the substantive test is also met. You are an independent judiciary. They are not only formal declaration of rights. These are the rights which are enforceable in the court of law. These are rights which are meaningful. Therefore, the Constitution of India meets the test of rule of law, and it crystallizes the rule of law guaranteed to the people. You cannot have rule of law beyond the Constitution. But as I said, the Constitution itself may provide a window. And here in India, a window is provided that is in the form of judicial power. The judiciary has the power to appeal to certain basic principles and humanize the law when the law falls for interpretation, not otherwise. When Article 368 fell for interpretation on the question of what are the limits of powers of the parliament to amend the Constitution, is it an absolute power? Is it a blanket grant of power? Or is it a power with limits? There was a big debate. Finally, in Keshavananda Bharati case, Supreme Court went ahead and said there is a higher norm called basic structure of the Constitution, which acts as a cap on the power of the parliament in amending the Constitution. It can amend any part of the Constitution, but if that amendment leads to violation of the principle of federalism, rule of law, equality, various principles of democracy, the court said such a constitutional amendment is bad in law. In fact, the entire basic structure can be summed up as rule of law. But Supreme Court has said basic structure, let us keep it, because in law always, whatever the word court coins, that has to be accepted. What is the substantive meaning is a different matter. Now recently the Supreme Court in Manoj case has coined another doctrine. Later it was repeated in the Triple Talaq, the principle of constitutional morality. What is this constitutional morality? Again, a higher principle of law. A higher principle of law exists. So the acts or constitution, when it falls for interpretation, its meaning can be given by taking guidance from constitutional morality, which is the superior or higher law. But what is constitutional morality? These are the objective standards which judiciary is capable of interpreting and spelling out. There's no doubt about it. One may have a grievance that a particular interpretation of the court on what is constitutional morality is not correct, but that's a different matter. There's an argument against this, that it compromises into the role of the parliament or people's representatives. The judiciary is exceeding its role. Well, these are the arguments, but let me also tell you, the judiciary is an important organ to keep the constitution moving, because the constitution is devised for generations of people to come. There has to be some independent interpreting authority, and independent authority should interpret the law with the changing times as people aspire in the changing period. Even in England, where the concept of judicial review does not exist, because the first principle of English constitutional law is that Parliament is sovereign. It can make unmake anything. So much so, it can declare man a woman, woman a man. Even in England, there is a suggestion in the case of Jackson versus Attorney General in 2005 that if a parliament were to make a law taking away the powers of the English courts, that the power of judicial review, can we be the mute spectator? Lord Steen says no. Such a law will test it on the principle of constitutional fundamentals. What is constitutional fundamentals? Is again a facet of rule of law. So rule of law is a broad concept, is a principle of morality, constitutional morality, which governs the relationship between law and the liberty. And finally, it guides the court in exercise of its powers while interpreting the Constitution in a difficult situations. Thank you very much. I hope I've been able to make the abstract subject more easily understandable to the students. You are the future judges, lawyers, professors. I'm sure, given the history of University Law College, Bangalore, which has produced many eminent lawyers and judges. One among you who is listening will be the judge of the Supreme Court of India or Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I wish you all the best. I hope many of you will be great lawyers and Attorney General of India. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your very informative and thought-provoking lecture. And you have explained very clearly and in simple terms the very abstract and most complicated subject on law, liberty, and rule of law. And our students and all of us are highly benefited by your learned lecture, scholarly lecture. And I, on behalf of all of my colleagues and all the students, I would also like to thank you profusely for accepting our request to be an adjunct professor or a visiting professor for our law school, as we are proposing to have some eminent lawyers like you as adjunct or visiting professors. And it's really a great opportunity for all our students to hear to you eminent lawyers, senior lawyers. And in fact, it is really a great opportunity for all our students. And I'm really grateful to you for accepting that proposal also. And that too, it is for the information of all the faculty and all our students that senior advocates, eminent advocates, advocate like Sri Mohan Katarki ji has agreed to spare his valuable time of 1 or 2 days in a month to address and interact with our students, and that too free of cost, without charging anything. That is a great thing for all of us. And thank you very much, sir, again for accepting our invitation and sparing your valuable time and rendering a very intellectual lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving knowledgeable insights on law, liberty, and the rule of law, and also explaining the evolution and prominence of the same with such exceptional clarity. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you. Is there any question over as such?
Yeah, there will be a question.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, anybody in the audience, if you have any question, please raise your hands or send the question in the chat box to the host.
Vinay is not there?
Yes, sir. So the first question is from Arsalan. So the first question is from Arsalan Zaili.
Okay.
What is your opinion on what is the role of an advocate towards the judiciary for implementation of justice in the current situation or circumstances? This I may ask in perspective of a recent Contempt of Court Act.
Yeah. The role of a lawyer is to advance the case of a client before the court. He is an officer of the court. When he pleads for the client before the court, he does not only act as an agent of the client, but acts as an officer of the court. When he acts as an officer of the court, his responsibilities are higher than what usually an agent acts on behalf of a principal. When a lawyer pleads case in the court, the most important thing incumbent upon him is to stick to the record and economize the time of the court, and not to advance any frivolous arguments just to please his client. He must think, exercise his judgment, and advance the arguments which are plausible. This is one aspect. Now, the larger aspect which the lawyer owes it to the court, to the judicial system, are different. These roles are really the roles which a lawyer derives because lawyer is considered to be one of the two wheels of justice. If judiciary is one wheel, lawyer is considered another wheel of the wheels of justice. If the wheels of justice includes lawyer, then lawyer has the right to comment upon certain happenings in the judiciary. The lawyer, when he speaks for the public as such. When the lawyer's body speak, they speak for the public. So when the lawyer speaks something which affects the judiciary, in a sense, judiciary feels offended that particular statement of a lawyer has hurt its reputation or hurt the reputation of the administration of justice or institution of justice, then the judiciary has the power to initiate the contempt proceedings. Every court of superior jurisdiction has inherent powers of contempt. That is the Supreme Court as well as the High Courts. Now the question comes, in the context of the recent development, how far the court should go in exercising its powers. If a lawyer comments on the judiciary with regard to certain corruptions, can judiciary tolerate it? Is it incumbent upon the judiciary in the larger interest to take action against the lawyer by punishing him for the contempt of court? The issue was judicially decided by the Supreme Court, holding Mr. Prashant Bhushan guilty of contempt. It's the decision of the Supreme Court. However, many of us, I too include, feel the Supreme Court has been little intolerant in convicting Mr. Prashant Bhushan and subsequently sentencing him. But we do not attribute any motives. We feel it's an error, shouldn't have happened. They should have better ignored it. We also do not subscribe to the first tweet of Mr. Prashant Bhushan, which was a bit nasty. The second tweet, according to us, was a general tweet, which is something, as we have been always criticizing Supreme Court judgments. We always say that Supreme Court judgment in ADM Jabalpur case is the most unfortunate judgment. It is a black mark on the Indian judiciary, but that doesn't constitute a contempt. So if the Prashant Bhushan had said that in future, when somebody writes history of Indian judiciary, surely he will have something to say upon the 4 last Chief Justices. That is his view. I don't think it really constituted a contempt. But however, the court has now said that it constitutes a contempt. And while ruling that, we feel that court did not recognize the importance of lawyers speaking out. Thank you. Nothing more.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is from Rajat. Sir, in the context of dichotomy between rule of law and rule by law, jurisprudentially speaking, is the law an invasion to curtail liberty or the emancipation of rights of liberty remained dormant within a man, ever arrested? Which of these two you consider to be the important function of law?
Yeah. The rule of law is contrasted with 2 more phrases: rule by law, and some in England say rule by man. Rule of law is a phrase, as I said, which represents that the ruler shall rule based upon the law. He shall not rule as an inheritor of divine power, but he shall rule as a person who got his power from the people. This is how the rule of law concept goes. The rule by law is a different concept. The ruler does not recognize, or the lawmaker, that he derives his right to rule from the consent of the people. He doesn't recognize social contract theory. He recognizes that he has his divine power to rule, but I will rule by making a law, which of course he will agree to publish it. He will agree to follow the necessary procedure. But rule by law is not same as rule of law. Rule by law is a rule by a sovereign who doesn't account himself to the law, but he wishes people to account to the law. That's the distinction. Thank you.
So can we take up one last question, sir?
Sure.
This is from Arslan again. Sir, kindly throw some light on judiciary to implement law in a case, and how important is the judge's juristic approach towards the case?
Yeah. I was reading a novel. Somebody said there was a discussion between one lawyer and some lady. What is this court of law? Are they simply a dispute resolution mechanism or something more? Courts are not just the dispute resolution mechanism. In a sense, judge acts like a mechanical engineer. The courts of law, when they exercise judicial power, they exercise the power to correct the law to some limited extent. Of course, the rules of interpretations govern the correction of law. Judges cannot have arbitrary powers to correct the law. But nevertheless, the court has power to correct the law in a sense, to make it reasonable, to make it just, to make it more acceptable to the facts of the cases. There is something called individualization of justice. Supreme Court said in the case of Dharwad Daily Wages employee case in 1990. Laws are the abstract concept. If you read the debate with regard to Aristotle, who first advocated the need for a law as an abstract proposition to govern the people. Before the concept of law came, it was only the word of the king who issued a command on a specific case. There was no general law as such. But general law was thought necessary, general command, which becomes the law, on abstract ideas that nobody shall kill another person. It's an abstract concept. Whether a particular killing is justified or not is a separate matter. For that, there are exceptions provided. So a lot of debate used to be there that abstract law is not justified because it is not possible for the legislator or the lawmaker to visualize all the situations that come in the society and make some abstract law and create a tyranny in public. That was the concept. Now, this has been cured by making lawmaking process a democratic process. Now, further, a judiciary has been given a power to interpret the law. While interpreting the law, judiciary, or while applying the law, judiciary has to finally see what is justice between the party and accordingly apply the law. Interpret the law, one thing, which is governed by the rules of interpretation. Secondly, which is again most important, which practicing lawyer comes across every day, how to apply the law in a particular case and how to do justice between the parties in a given circumstances. Most of the time, Supreme Court uses its power under Article 142, that is the complete justice concept. If they feel that the fine edges of law, the hard and fast rule, is not able to bring justice between the parties in a situation, sometimes court supplements its own version of certain legal notions. That's how the justice between the parties is brought about in a judicial system. But this power as such exists only in the Supreme Court. Otherwise, in normal courts do not have power to that extent, but still there is a power. CPC grants inherent powers to the courts, both High Court as well as to the Civil Court, to do justice and what is just and equitable between the parties. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for patiently answering all the questions asked by our audience.